All right, so we spent some time looking at the long-term causes of the Chinese Civil War, and now we get to looking at the short term. Learning outcomes include basically understand that what these short-term events were, and analyze their impacts in leading to war. And then, of course, you need to basically do a little bit of revision, helping us getting ready to look at the short-term causes of the Chinese Civil War and compare and contrast with those of the Spanish. We've spent some time looking at the Qing dynasty and the social and political instability during the late 19th century and early 20th century. And all of that comes to a head with the real revolution. Some people think that the revolution of the Double Tenth, which happened in 1911, is the more revolutionary of the revolutions, because with this we have an overthrow of thousands of years of imperial rule and the establishment of a new type of political system with a republic. Of course, we've had that developing sense of nationalism throughout the late 19th century, and it really comes to a head. The Empress Cixi dies in 1908 and leaves a toddler as the Emperor of China. And so you have a lot of infighting, a lot of confusion, discussion, disagreement over the direction the country should go in. And the nationalists have been picking up steam, and they do have a charismatic leader, and they resent the continued ineffectiveness of the government. Things have not gotten any better. The imperial reforms, the 100 Days of 1898, went kaput and went nowhere. The imperial reforms of like 1910 in the establishment of assemblies went nowhere. These assemblies had limited power. And so people, essentially, they were just done with the limitations of imperial reform. Nothing was really happening. And then, to add insult to injury, because the government is kind of broke, it nationalizes private railways. And so what it's done now is extremely bad, because it really angers the people in the society who had money and who were building these political influence. And on top of this nationalization and essentially taking money out of the hands of people who had the wherewithal to do something about it in their discontent, you have flooding, massive amounts of flooding, and on top of that, harvest failure in the South. So we now have more starving people. And the government is trying to take control of things and is trying to organize the army. And they send new army recruits to Wuhan, which is in a more central part of China. And this is where the revolutionary conspiracy begins. And this is where the revolution begins. There was the formation of a revolutionary alliance, and this was actually partly within China, but also there was a huge population of ethnic Chinese living in other countries in Asia. And so there was this alliance of people to kind of overthrow the Chinese the government, to overthrow the Qing dynasty and establish a republic. And Sun was one of the main dudes involved in this, and all of these ethnic Chinese living abroad were largely business people who still felt a connection to China, but had the wherewithal and the ability to operate outside of the government's auspices. Sun Yat-sen was proclaimed the president of the new republic, so they did not fully overthrow the Qing dynasty, but they declared a republic, the Republic of China. Now, unfortunately, Sun Yat-sen had a huge amount of support in various communities both within and outside of China. However, the Qing military refused to give up control. So they overthrew, well, not quite, but they established this new republic. However, they didn't have control over all of China. And not only did they not have control over other parts of China, but the military still controlled it. And so he had to broker a deal with General Yuan Shikai in order to defeat the Qing. And by this, because the general was powerful within the military, he was able to kind of get everybody else to follow him and lay down their arms. Yuan Shikai, of course, is like, dude, if I'm gonna get people to follow you and throw you support and get rid of this Qing, I am not doing this for free, but in Chinese. And so he wanted the presidency for his help. And while Sun Yat-sen had a lot of support, he didn't have the military power, most definitely, to be able to force the military to back down. And so Sun Yat-sen had set up some Republican institutions, and Yuan Shikai says he's going to become president. So the Chinese Republic, or the Republic of China, was established with the abdication of Puyi in early 1912. So if you remember, Puyi was about 5 at this time. He was the toddler who became the emperor, the last Qing emperor and the emperor of China, to basically rule with regents after the death of Dowager Empress Cixi in 1908. And here we have an image of Yuan Shikai being sworn in as president, and you should be able to see the huge amount of military people around, so things might not work out. All right, so Yuan Shikai is in power from 1912 to 1916, and this is called the false dawn of parliamentary government. Oh, it was a false dawn. All right. So the Revolutionary Alliance evolves and becomes the Guomindang, the GMD. That is, it becomes a political party rather than just an association of people agitating for change. And Yuan Shikai calls for parliamentary elections, but he doesn't really want to share power. So initially, when Sun Yat-sen was at the head of the republic, he set up these democratic institutions. Sun Yat-sen had spent a huge amount of time abroad, observing, learning, and adapting these ideas to the Chinese situation. And so he set up these sort of organs that would then develop into a functioning democracy and a functioning government, but Yuan Shikai pretty much ignores them. And he killed the leaders of and banned the GMD. Obviously, hence it was a false dawn. Sun Yat-sen has to flee the country, so he doesn't die. He closed parliament, and at one point he declares himself emperor. In 1915, he declares himself emperor. Now, surprise, surprise, people were not willing to follow him as an emperor, and you start having increasing warlordism even in the areas that the Qing had been able to maintain control over. And unfortunately, he is unable to stand up against Japan because World War I has broken out by this point in time, and Japan has expanded further into China, seizing the opportunity of taking control of the German concessions while Germany is focused on the European war. So in World War I, as Japan is attempting to expand her influence, she presents China with the 21 demands. And this is what is referenced previously in terms of Yuan Shikai being unable to stand up to Japan. And so Japan presents China with these 21 demands. And essentially, the 21 demands ask for, or demand, the German concessions in China. And it pretty much asks or demands for China to give up all of her, whatever autonomy she has in terms of like the economy and financial matters, to Japan. Japan was to have like advisors come in and basically tell China what to do and all of this stuff. And one of the things about the 21 demands is that it presages, it foreshadows what's going to happen later on with the invasion of Manchuria and the invasion of World War II. Basically, Japan's aggressive expansionism, not just within areas in East Asia, but onto the Chinese mainland itself. And ultimately, the U.S. frowns upon this. Britain frowns upon this, but of course, Britain can't go too harshly because she does need Japan's help in World War I. And the U.S., of course, is starting to be somewhat worried about Japan's expansion in Asia and threatening the U.S.'s expansion in East Asia. And this conflict, or one of the major causes of World War II in the Pacific, is this conflict of expansion and influence between the U.S. and Japan. Ultimately, Japan reduces it to 13, and China accepts, Yuan Shikai accepts. Japan gets pretty much all of the concessions that she had already taken, but now it's a formal recognition of her control over these German areas by China. And this also, the 21 demands also foreshadows the sides of the conflict of World War II in terms of Britain and the US and China against Japan. And this whole 21 demands thing and this erosion of sovereignty, this expansion by Japan, is one of the reasons why China is going to join World War I. She doesn't join to fight so much, but essentially during World War I, as the war wages on longer than people expected it to, it becomes increasingly difficult to provide the services that allow the war to continue. That is, keeping the ships moving, the transport ships moving, building roads, et cetera, et cetera. And so this participation in World War I was China's attempt to push back at Japan a little bit and reduce the Japanese demands on China. And we'll see how that works out later on. Basically, eventually, Yuan Shikai is receiving increasingly little support from other military leaders in regions of China, as well as the people and the GMD. Eventually, Yuan Shikai retires, or I guess steps down, and then he dies of something old. I'm just kidding. Well, he does die 3 months later.